Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, last Friday, the SEC Securities Exchange Commission filed fraud charges against investment bank Goldman Sachs for misleading and defrauding investors through their selling of a complex financial product based on toxic subprime mortgages. These charges are serious, but the SEC should have been investigating the abusive practices that contributed to our financial crisis much sooner. American taxpayers could see that Goldman Sachs was a lot of smoke and mirrors. American taxpayers could see past Lloyd Blankfein's defense of his company when he said such things as he said, we're very, very important. He went on to say, I'm doing God's work. Americans could see that there were problems on Wall Street well before the SEC was willing to publicly acknowledge it. Now, according to the SEC, Goldman Sachs was approached by one of the world's largest hedge funds, Paulson and Company, which asked the firm to create and market collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, whose values were linked to the value of toxic home loans. With billions being offered, Goldman Sachs obliged and created Abacus, which the hedge fund then placed bets against, knowing that this new financial instrument was certain to lose value. Then Goldman Sachs failed to tell Abacus investors that the very hedge fund that they helped to create and assemble the toxic CDOs, they were betting against them. The product was new and complex, but the deception and conflicts are old and simple. That's what the SEC's Director of Division Enforcement said. Goldman wrongly permitted a client that was betting against the mortgage market to heavily influence which mortgage securities to include in an investment portfolio, while telling other investors that the securities were selected by an independent, objective third party. The Goldman Sachs Paulson and Company deal closed on April 26, 2007, with the hedge fund paying Goldman Sachs $15 million for restructuring and marketing Abacus to unknowing investors. Unfortunately, however, by October 24th of that same year, 83% of the residential mortgage-backed securities in Abacus' portfolio had been downgraded, and 17% were on the negative watch. Less than a year later, on January 28, 2008, 99% of Abacus' portfolio had been downgraded. Those who invested in this hedge fund lost more than $1 billion. Goldman Sachs' official statement that, quote, the SEC charges are completely unfounded in law and in fact. We will vigorously contest them and defend the firm and its reputation. Now, that statement contrasts greatly with the words of Goldman CEO Lloyd Blankfein when he publicly apologized in November of last year for the bank's role in some of the activities that lead up to the financial crisis. This is what he said, quote, we participated in things that were clearly wrong and have reason to regret. We are sorry. We apologize. Unfortunately, however, it appears the senior leadership at Goldman Sachs knew months before they even marketed Abacus to investors that the housing market was about to crash. Goldman's Vice President, Fabrice Touré, who is said to be the man who structured the toxic financial instruments, preparing the marketing materials and communicated directly with investors, he sent an email stating the whole thing is about to collapse any time now. Now he's taking a leave of absence from the position at the firm. The allegations against Goldman Sachs are very serious, and Goldman Sachs has a right to challenge the SEC's civil fraud charges. But the SEC also has a duty to American taxpayers to get to the bottom of this and continue to investigate any abusive practice employed by all financial institutions, not just Goldman Sachs. Mr. Speaker, the American people recall that Goldman Sachs was a TARP bailout recipient and one of the few big Wall Street banks that managed to not only benefit from taxpayer bailout, but also to emerge stronger than before. Goldman Sachs received $10 billion in TARP funds, was allowed to convert to a bank holding company in order to gain additional support from the Federal Reserve, and was one of the largest recipients from the $180 billion AIG bailout when it received 100% on the dollar in payments and public funds from the insurance giant. The American public is now an unwilling majority owner in AIG. And with Goldman having received a backdoor bailout with public funds through AIG, it would only be fair to make all of AIG's counterparty, including Goldman Sachs, buy back the CDOs at full price. Goldman Sachs could use the profits they gained from the AIG bailouts to pay down the billions in public debt still held by AIG. If Goldman Sachs truly has regret for participating in these activities leading up, and they're clearly wrong, then their CEO has said he apologized, then Goldman Sachs should step up to the plate and make reparations that are owed to the American taxpayers.